In a peaceful village tucked away between green hills and winding paths, there stood a convent. It was quiet, old, and surrounded by flowers. The white walls were covered in climbing roses, and birds often sang in the early morning. Convent lived a group of nuns who spent their days in prayer, work, and silent reflection. Among them was an elderly nun named Sister Lucile. She was small in size, with silver-white hair always tied neatly under her habit. Her steps were slow, but graceful. Her hands, though wrinkled and thin, still moved with a certain softness, as if they had once known another rhythm. Sister Lucile didn't speak much. She wasn't the kind to share stories or attract attention. She preferred to stay in the background watering the garden, folding laundry, preparing vegetables in the kitchen, or quietly praying in the chapel. Most of the younger sisters respected her for her kindness and discipline, but they didn't know much about her past. She had been in the convent longer than anyone could remember. Some of the sisters had joined after her, and even grown old beside her, but none had heard her speak about her youth or her life before she became a nun. There was one thing. In the corner of the chapel, covered by a cloth and never used, sat an old upright piano. It was dusty and out of tune, but still beautiful in its own way. Most people walked past it without thinking, but every now and then, someone would notice. Sister Lucile looking at it, not just a casual glance, but a deep, long look, as if she was remembering something only she could see. Her eyes would soften, sometimes even shine a little, like they were reflecting a memory no one else could feel. One of the younger nuns, Sister Marie, noticed this one day. She had been in the convent for only a few months and was still learning the rules and rhythms of their daily life. Marie was cheerful, curious, and full of energy. She admired Sister Lucile's calm presence and often tried to help her in the garden. One morning, while sweeping near the chapel, she saw Sister Lucile standing by the piano. The older nun wasn't touching it, just standing close with her fingers hovering in the air. Marie stayed quiet and watched from a distance. After a few minutes, Lucile slowly turned and walked away, as if waking from a dream. Later that day, Marie asked one of the other nuns, "Does Sister Lucile play the piano?" The nun smiled and shook her head. "No, she never does. I don't think anyone here plays it." "Then why do we have one?" Marie asked. "It's been there for years. I think it came with the convent. But music isn't really encouraged here except for hymns." Marie found that strange. She came from a family that loved music, and to her, the idea of having a piano and never playing it was like owning a garden and never planting flowers. Still, a question remained in her heart. Why did Sister Lucile look at the piano like that? Over the next few weeks, Marie kept her eyes open. She noticed that Lucile always passed by the piano slowly, almost respectfully, as if it were something sacred. Once, Marie thought she saw Lucile's lips moving silently, as if she was counting or humming something in her head. One rainy afternoon, when chores were light and the sky was dark, Marie found herself in the attic of the convent, helping to organize some old boxes. Most of them were filled with books, candle holders, or old robes. But then, hidden in a corner beneath a pile of cloth, she found a small wooden chest. Inside were black and white photographs, yellowed with time. They showed a younger woman who looked very much like Sister Lucile, except this woman was standing beside a grand piano on a stage. In another photo, she was holding a bouquet of flowers, with a crowd in the background. Marie's heart beat faster. She flipped through more pictures. Lucile sitting at a piano, Lucile bowing after what looked like a concert, Lucile with a group of musicians. This wasn't just some casual piano player. Sister Lucile had once been a performer, maybe. Even famous Marie didn't say anything right away. She put the photos back carefully, but her curiosity burned brighter than ever. The next morning, she gently approached Lucile in the garden. "Sister Lucile?" she asked softly. Lucile looked up, her eyes warm as always. "Yes, child. Hope you don't mind, but I was in the attic yesterday and I found some old photographs." Lucile's smile faded slightly. She looked down at her hands, now resting on her lap. "You used to play the piano?" Marie said carefully. "On a stage." You were amazing, weren't you? Lucille didn't answer right away. For a moment, it seemed like she wouldn't answer at all, but then she let out a soft breath and nodded. Yes, she said. A long time ago. Marie sat beside her on the garden bench, waiting quietly. I started when I was 4, Lucille said after a pause. My mother said I could play before I could speak in full sentences. By the time I was 12, I was performing in small halls. By 16, I was traveling across Europe. Piano was my whole life. Marie listened, fascinated. But something changed. She asked. Lucille nodded slowly. Yes, many things. The world got noisier. Fame became a burden. My heart began to feel empty, even though my concerts were full. I played for thousands of people, but I felt like I wasn't playing for anyone. Not really. She looked at the sky, now turning golden with the setting sun. Then I heard a sermon one day. A visiting priest spoke about peace, not the peace of silence, but the peace of purpose. It stayed with me. I returned home, gave my final concert, and came here. Marie was silent for a while, not sure what to say. Do you miss it? She finally asked. Lucille smiled gently. Not the stage, not the travel, but yes, one miss. The keys, I miss the language of it. Music was how I spoke to the world. Sometimes I wonder if that voice is still inside me. Then why don't you play? Marie asked, almost in a whisper. Lucille's smile faded again. When I joined the convent, I was told it would be better if I left the piano behind, that it might be a distraction from God, from silence, from simplicity. So I agreed. I wanted to be obedient. I still do. Marie felt a sadness in her chest, not just for Lucille, but for the beauty that had been kept silent for so long. But maybe, she said softly, God gave you that gift for a reason. Lucille looked at her with eyes that held both surprise and warmth. She said nothing, but that night Marie noticed her walking toward the chapel again alone, as always. Inside the chapel, the piano sat in its corner, still covered. Lucille stood in front of it for a long time. Her hands hovered in the air, trembling slightly. Then she slowly reached out and lifted the cloth. Dust floated in the air. The keys, yellowed with age, waited quietly. She sat down on the bench, but didn't play. Not yet. She just sat there, her fingers resting gently on the keys. Then, without pressing a single note, she closed her eyes and began to hum a melody soft, haunting and full of memory. The chapel was silent except for the sound of her breath, and the hum that echoed like a forgotten lullaby. The next morning, the piano was still covered just as it had been for years. No one mentioned it. Sister Lucille returned to her usual routine, watering the flowers, serving soup, and folding linens. But something had changed. Her step was lighter, her eyes had a little more shine. And once, while working in the kitchen, Marie saw her fingers tapping silently on the table, as if remembering a rhythm only she could hear. In the weeks that followed, Marie kept hoping she would hear music in the chapel. But Lucille stayed silent. Or perhaps she was waiting, not just for permission, but for the right moment. The right reason. And that moment, though, still far away, was beginning to take shape. The piano had waited for years, and maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't have to wait much longer. The convent continued its quiet life, untouched by the outside world. Days moved slowly, filled with prayer, silence, and small acts of service. But in the hearts of two people, Sister Lucille and Sister Marie, something had changed. Nothing looked different from the outside. There was now a spark inside both of them. It was invisible to others, but very much alive. Sister Lucille had shared her past, a secret that had been hidden for decades. Now Marie couldn't stop thinking about it. She imagined a younger Lucille on grand stages, her hands flying over, the keys with grace and fire. She imagined applause, standing ovations, and music so powerful it moved people to tears. But that life had been buried under years of silence. Still, the memory of it hadn't died, was simply sleeping. Marie wanted the world, or at least the convent, to hear that music again. But she also understood how delicate the situation was. Sister Lucille hadn't touched a piano in years. And more than that, she had made a promise to stay away from it when she joined the convent. That promise, though perhaps made under pressure, still mattered to her. Lucille was a woman of deep loyalty and faith. She wouldn't break a promise easily, even if her heart longed to. But Marie was young and full of hope. She believed that if God gave someone a gift, it was meant to be shared. Maybe, just maybe, this was the right time to bring it back. One evening, while helping Lucille fold laundry, Marie spoke carefully. "Sister Lucille," she began, her tone gentle, "I've been thinking about the piano." Lucille looked up but didn't speak. "I know you promised not to play, but maybe that promise was made too quickly. Maybe they didn't understand how much it meant to you." Lucille smiled faintly. "I understood," she said. "I still do. This life is about surrender." "But don't you think music can be a form of prayer too?" Marie asked. "A way of praising God not with words, but with sound." Lucille's hands paused mid-fold. She stared at the sheet in her hands for a moment before answering. "Yes," she said quietly. "It can. It always was for me." That night, Marie stayed up late thinking. She didn't want to push Lucille, but she also didn't want the gift to die in silence. She decided to do something that felt small but brave. The convent had a bulletin board where announcements were posted, upcoming events, visiting guests, and other news. On a small piece of paper, Marie wrote, "Musical talents welcome for upcoming charity evening, singers, musicians, or anyone interested. Please speak to Sister Agnes." She pinned it to the board quietly, hoping someone would see it. What she didn't expect was that a few hours later, it would cause quite a stir. The convent was planning a charity evening to raise funds for a nearby orphanage. It was a yearly tradition, and people from the village were often invited. Usually it included prayer, a shared meal, and sometimes a short speech. But this year, someone had suggested adding music. A few sisters could sing hymns, and a young priest who played guitar was invited. The idea was simple: offer warmth and beauty to touch people's hearts and encourage donations. When Mother Superior saw the note about musicians, she frowned. She didn't like surprises or unnecessary noise. She believed the convent should remain focused on silence, simplicity, and discipline. Still, she allowed it, as long as it was done tastefully. A few sisters showed interest. One could sing. Another remembered how to play the tambourine. Marie added her name as well, saying she could help organize the music. But what she really wanted, what she dreamed of, was for Sister Lucille to play. One afternoon, Marie decided to do something bold. She approached Sister Agnes, who was in charge of the event, and whispered her idea. "What if Sister Lucille played the piano?" she asked. Sister Agnes looked surprised. "Sister Lucille? Does she even know how to play?" Marie nodded. "She used to be a concert pianist, very talented. There are photos in the attic." Agnes was silent for a moment. "It's not our place to decide that," she said carefully. "You'll need to speak to Mother Superior." Marie hesitated. She knew how strict Mother Superior could be, but she also knew this might be the only chance. So she waited for the right moment and finally asked for a private meeting. Sitting across from the tall, serious woman in her office, Marie took a deep breath. "Mother Superior, I have a humble request," she began. "For the charity event, I would like to invite Sister Lucille to play the piano." There was a long pause. The room felt heavy. "Sister Lucille," Mother Superior repeated. "Yes, she played professionally before joining the convent. I believe her music could deeply touch the hearts of the guests and bring blessings to the event." Mother Superior leaned back in her chair. Sister Lucille made a commitment when she joined. She agreed to leave that life behind. Marie didn't give up, but the piano is still here. Maybe it's not meant to be forgotten. Maybe this is a way she can serve by sharing what was once given to her. Mother Superior's voice turned colder. "The convent is not a concert hall, Sister Marie. We do not chase applause or attention." "I understand," Marie said, softly. "But perhaps we should not bury our talents either." The meeting ended with no clear answer. Marie felt disheartened but not defeated. Meanwhile, Lucille sensed something was going on. She saw Marie speaking to different sisters. She noticed whispers and glances toward the piano. And one day she gently pulled Marie aside. "What are you doing, child? she asked kindly. Marie? Didn't lie. I want you to play again. Just once. For the charity event. Lucille shook her head, her expression both sad and firm. I appreciate your heart. But some doors were closed for a reason. Marie looked into her eyes. But maybe. They were only meant to be closed for a while. Maybe the time has come to open them again. Lucille didn't answer. She simply walked away. But that night, when the convent was quiet and the others were asleep, she returned to the chapel. The piano stood silently in its corner, untouched and waiting. She uncovered it again. The keys looked older now, but familiar. She sat down slowly, her fingers trembling. She didn't press any keys, but she let her hands hover above them, remembering. Then, with one single breath, she pressed a note. It rang out soft, slightly off tune, but still beautiful. She played another, then a chord, then a slow line from a piece she once knew by heart. The sound filled the empty chapel like warm candlelight. It was not loud, but it was rich. Her hands moved gently, carefully, as if waking from a long sleep. She played only for a minute or two, then stopped. Tears had gathered in her eyes. She stood up quickly, covered the piano again, and left. Over the next few nights, she returned again and again, always late, always alone. Each time, she played a little longer. Her fingers found strength. Her memory returned. She played hymns, classical pieces, and even melodies she had written herself many years ago. The music was soft, like a secret prayer whispered into the darkness. One evening, Marie entered the chapel quietly, not knowing Lucille was there. When she heard the piano, she froze. She stood in the shadows, her heart beating fast. She didn't dare interrupt. When Lucille finished and turned around, their eyes met. There was no anger, only a quiet understanding. You heard, Lucille? Asked softly. Marie nodded. You're still brilliant. Lucille smiled faintly. It's like riding a bicycle. The fingers remember, even when the heart forgets. Marie stepped forward. Then say yes. Play at the charity event. Lucille's face grew serious again. I don't know if I'm strong enough. My fingers hurt. My back aches. And I'm scared. Marie was surprised. Scared of what? Scared of being seen again. Of being judged. Of losing the peace I've worked so hard to keep. Marie gently took her hand. Then don't play for the crowd. Don't play for the event. Play for him. Play because it's who you are. Lucille looked down at their joined hands, her eyes filled with emotion. I'll think about it, she said. As the charity event grew closer, preparations began. Chairs were arranged. Decorations were made. The local priest confirmed his attendance, and the bishop was also expected to visit. The guest list included villagers, donors, and some wealthy sponsors who supported the orphanage. The pressure was growing. One day, Mother Superior made a final decision. She called Lucille into her office. I've been told you've been playing the piano at night, she said calmly. Lucille nodded. Yes, Mother. I cannot stop you from doing so in private, she continued. But I do not approve of public performance. It is not the image we wish to show. Lucille lowered her eyes. I understand. But later that day, something unexpected happened. The local pianist who had agreed to play at the event called to cancel. He had fallen ill and couldn't make it. Sister Agnes came rushing with the news. They needed someone to fill the spot. Fast. Marie, standing nearby, looked directly at Lucille. There's still one person who can, she said. Lucille didn't say yes. But she also didn't say no. That night, she played longer than ever. Her fingers hurt, her back ached. But her heart was stronger than it had been in years. The piano, long silent, was now singing again, and in just a few days, the world would hear it too. The evening of the charity event arrived like a quiet storm. A convent, usually silent and still, was filled with the soft sounds of movement, chairs being arranged, candles being lit, and dishes being carried to the tables. Everyone had something to do. There was a buzz in the air that no one could ignore. Even the garden looked brighter that day, touched by the glow of something special. But for Sister Lucille, everything felt heavy. she had decided. After many years of silence, she was going to play the piano in front of others. It wasn't a loud announcement. She hadn't told everyone. It's only Sister Marie and Sister Agnes knew. The news had not yet reached Mother Superior, and maybe that was for the best. Lucille didn't want drama. She didn't want attention. Only wanted to share something beautiful and true. She had spent the last few nights practicing in secret. Her hands were not as quick as they once were, but they remembered enough. Her fingers still found the right keys, and her heart still filled the notes with life. Music was coming back to her, like an old friend returning home. The chapel had been transformed for the event. It didn't look like a concert hall Lucille had played in those before, but it looked warm, welcoming. White cloths covered the tables, simple flower arrangements sat in the corners, and a small stage had been set up at the front. A microphone stood nearby, mostly for the speakers and singers. And at one side of the stage, almost like it had been waiting for this moment all its life, stood the piano. Lucille stared at it from a distance. So many emotions rose inside her: fear, excitement, doubt, and hope. Could she really do this? Could she play again, not just in secret, but in front of others? Would they understand? Would they judge? Would they even care? Guests began to arrive slowly. Some were from the village farmers, shopkeepers, teachers. Others came from the nearby town doctors, lawyers, and even a local news reporter who had heard about the event through the church. Everyone dressed simply, but there was a feeling of celebration in the air. Lucille sat quietly at the back of the chapel, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't wear anything special, just her usual habit, clean and pressed. But inside, she felt like a storm. Her heart pounded like a drum, her mouth was dry. Her fingers twitched slightly, as if already hearing the keys. Sister Marie came and sat beside her. "You look like you're about to run away," she whispered with a smile. Lucille smiled back, a nervous kind of smile. "I feel like it too." Marie squeezed her hand. "Don't, you were born for this." There were a few short speeches to begin the evening. Sister Agnes welcomed the guests and thanked everyone for supporting the orphanage. A priest read a prayer. Two young sisters sang a hymn together, their voices soft and sweet.
Albias
Clapped politely. The evening was going well. Then it was time for the music. The young priest from the town stepped forward with his guitar. He played two simple songs, both cheerful and full of meaning. People swayed slightly. Some even sang along. The energy in the room was warm, comfortable. But then, after he finished, there was a pause. Sister Agnes stepped up to the front again. "We have a very special surprise tonight," she said, looking over the crowd. "One of our own will now share something very dear and beautiful. Please welcome Sister Lucille." There was a silence, a pause so deep it felt like time had stopped. Heads turned. Whispers started. Sister Lucille, the quiet old nun who mostly did laundry and swept the floors? Lucille stood up slowly. Her legs felt heavy. Her knees slightly shook. But she walked forward with grace, her eyes fixed on the piano. She didn't look around. She didn't seek applause. She simply walked with purpose. As she reached the piano, she heard gasps from the crowd. People were surprised, even shocked. Some of the older guests whispered to one another. One woman even said, "That's her. I remember her name, Lucille. Armand. She was famous once." Lucille sat down at the bench, adjusted her posture, and rested her hands gently on the keys. The chapel fell silent. She closed her eyes for a moment, and then she began to play. The first note rang out like a drop of water in a still pond. Pure, soft, true. Then came another, and another, until the room was filled with a melody so beautiful. It felt like the air had changed. It was a piece she had written herself many years ago, long before the convent. It had never been played in public before. It's only in her heart. The music flowed from her hands like a river that had been waiting behind a dam. Slow, then faster, rich with feeling. Every note told a story of youth, of loss, of joy, of faith. The audience sat frozen. Some leaned forward, their eyes wide. Others closed their eyes, letting the sound carry them away. There was no flash, no showy display. It was simple, deep, and honest. Her fingers danced over the keys, not with the speed of a young artist, but with the wisdom of someone who had lived through silence and found their way back. A young child sitting near the front leaned into her mother and whispered, "Is she an angel?" Lucille didn't hear it. She didn't hear anything except the music. For those few minutes, she forgot where she was. She was no longer a nun or an old woman or someone who had once been told to give up her gift. She was only herself, whole, free. When the final note faded, there was a silence so full it felt louder than sound. Then, slowly, the crowd began to rise. One by one, they stood up. And then came the applause. Not loud at first, but growing, rising, until the whole room was clapping. Tears streamed down the faces of some guests. Even Sister Agnes wiped her eyes. Marie clapped with all her heart. The young priest dropped his guitar and joined in. Lucille stood up slowly. She bowed her head humbly, and without saying a word, she walked back to her seat. But something inside her had changed forever. Then came the real surprise. One of the older guests stood up and raised his hand. He was a well-known music critic who had retired in the village years ago. No one had seen him in public in months. That, he said clearly, was one of the most moving performances I've heard in decades. He looked around the room. I remember Lucille Armand. I heard her play in Paris, in Vienna. She was a genius, and she still is. Whispers filled the room. Few people gasped. It was true then. She wasn't just any musician. She had been a star. The local reporter scribbled furiously in her notebook. She had only come to cover a charity event. But now she had a real story, one that might spread far beyond the town. Mother Superior, who had stayed silent through most of the evening, looked shaken. She had not expected this. She had not approved it, but even she could not deny the power of what had just happened. After the event, people came up to Lucille one by one. Some shook her hand, others hugged her. Few simply stood in front of her and said thank you. No one talked about fame. No one talked about the past. They talked about how the music made them feel. That was all Lucille had ever wanted. Later, that night, when the chapel was quiet again and the guests had gone, Lucille sat alone by the piano. Marie joined her, sitting on the floor nearby. "You were incredible," she said softly. Lucille smiled, tears in her eyes. "I didn't do it for them," she whispered. "I did it for him, and maybe for me too." Marie looked up at her. "What happens now?" Lucille thought for a moment. "I don't know, but I think something has been unlocked, and it cannot be locked away again." Far away in the city, the next morning's newspaper carried the headline, "Forgotten Concert. Pianist found playing in local convent, a performance to remember." The story was picked up by other papers. People began to ask questions. Who was Sister Lucille? Could she play again? Would she? But in the convent, life returned to its gentle rhythm. Lucille continued her duties, still folded laundry, swept the floors, and prayed with the others. But now, something was different. Every evening after Vespers, a small group would gather in the chapel. Lucille would sit at the piano and play a hymn, a melody, or something from her heart. Not for applause, not for fame, but as a gift. A gift that had once been buried and was now alive again. Her story had begun again. Not as a concert pianist, not as a nun hiding from her past, but as a woman who found the courage to rise from silence and share her gift with the world, even if only for a few minutes at a time. And every time she touched the keys, the world listened, not because she was famous, but because she was true. After the charity evening, Sister Lucille felt like something inside her had changed forever. She had stepped out of the shadows and shared her deepest self with the world. The world had listened. The clapping, the tears, the kind words of it had touched her deeply. But even after such a powerful night, she returned to her quiet life in the convent. She didn't expect much to come out of it. She thought the moment would stay inside those chapel walls, like a beautiful memory meant only for the few who had seen it. But something surprising began to happen. 2 days after the event, a small article appeared in the local newspaper. It was written by the young reporter who had attended the charity evening. The headline was simple: "Unknown nun plays piano and leaves audience in tears." Below it, in bold letters, was her namesister, Lucille Armand. The article talked about her past as a child prodigy, her mysterious disappearance from the world of music, and how she had returned to the piano after decades. The reporter had not included everything, but what she wrote was honest and heartfelt. Lucille was surprised to see the newspaper sitting in the convent library. She picked it up slowly and read it from start to finish. She smiled at some parts. Others made her feel exposed. But overall, she felt proud, not because she had been mentioned in the news, but because someone had told the truth. That article spread faster than anyone expected. Within a week, other newspapers started calling. The convent journalists wanted to know more. Who was Sister Lucille? Why had she stopped playing? Why had she chosen to live in silence for so many years? The sisters at the convent were overwhelmed. They weren't used to this kind of attention. Phones rang often, and letters arrived from places far beyond there. Small town. One morning, Mother Superior called Lucille to her office. Her face was calm, but her eyes looked serious. "We have received a letter," she said, placing an envelope on the desk. "It's from a famous music conservatory in Paris. They're asking if you would consider visiting." Lucille blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected anything like this. "They're hosting a special event for women in music," Mother Superior continued. "They want you to perform, just one piece, as a guest of honor." Lucille didn't know what to say. Her hands trembled. Slightly, her heart raced. "You don't have to decide now," Mother Superior added, "but you should know the world has not forgotten you." That evening, Lucille sat in the chapel alone, staring at the piano. She gently placed her fingers on the keys, but didn't play. She was thinking. Her past had always felt like a closed chapter. She had walked away from it long ago. She had chosen a different life, a quieter one. But now, the world was knocking again. Could she return, even just for one performance? Could she walk into a grand hall, sit under the lights, and play for hundreds or maybe thousands of people? The very thought scared her. But it also lit something inside her heart. Sister Marie found her sitting there in silence. "You should go," she said softly. Lucille looked up. "It's not that easy." "Maybe not," Marie agreed. "But sometimes God opens a door for us, not to lead us away from where we are, but to bring something back that we thought we lost." Lucille thought about those words all night. She barely slept, but by morning her decision was clear. She would go. Preparations began quickly. The sisters helped in every way they could. One of the younger nuns ironed her best habit. Another packed her things. Marie even found an old photo of Lucille at the piano and gave it to her for strength. Lucille didn't need much. She wasn't going to impress the world. She was going to honor the gift she had been given. When she arrived in Paris, she was met with cameras and flashing lights. Reporters tried to ask questions, but Lucille stayed quiet. She smiled kindly, nodded at the crowd, and kept walking. She was there to play. The conservatory looked just as she remembered it. Grand pillars, marble stairs, a golden ceiling inside the main hall. It had once been her world, but now it felt distant, like visiting a place from a dream. Still, there was warmth in returning. She was shown to her dressing room. It was simple but elegant. A bouquet of white roses sat on the table. A small note was attached. "Welcome back, Maestro." She touched the petals gently, her fingers still. Remembered beauty as the time for the performance neared. Lucille sat backstage, eyes closed, listening to the sounds of the audience gathering. She wasn't nervous this time, not the way she had been at the convent. Instead, she felt ready. She had already played for the most important audience of her life. This was simply another chapter. When they called her name, the lights dimmed. A soft hush fell over the crowd. Lucille stepped onto the stage slowly. She looked smaller than the grand piano beside her, but she walked with calm strength. The host spoke into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our honor to welcome Sister Lucille Armand, whose music touched the world from silence. Audience clapped gently as she sat down. She didn't speak. She just placed her fingers on the keys, and then, once again, she played. This time it was a different piece. One she had written during her quiet years at the convent, a piece full of light and sadness, hope and prayer. The music rose like soft waves, filling every corner of the hall. Some in the audience cried. Others sat perfectly still, afraid to even breathe. There was no background noise, no coughs or whispers, just the sound of Lucille's soul. When she finished, she didn't bow. She simply stood, looked at the crowd, and gave a soft nod. The applause exploded. People stood on their feet, clapping, cheering, shouting her name. That night, Lucille became more than a story. She became a symbol, a reminder that no gift is ever truly lost, that it's never too late to return to something that once gave your life meaning. Back at the convent, the sisters watched the performance on television. Some cried, some clapped. Marie sat in front of the screen with her hands over her mouth, whispering she did it. Oh, she really did it. The performance was shared online. Millions watched. People from around the world wrote letters to the convent. Some wanted to thank Lucille for inspiring them. Others wanted to hear her play again. A young blind boy from Brazil wrote, "When I heard your music, I saw light for the first time." A woman battling cancer in Canada said, "Your piano gave me peace I haven't felt in months." Lucille read every letter. She kept them in a box under her bed. She didn't reply to all, but she prayed for each person by name. Still, despite the fame and the attention, Lucille remained the same. She didn't move to the city. She didn't record albums. She didn't start touring. She returned to the convent. She returned to sweeping floors, folding clothes, and feeding the poor. But something had changed. Every Saturday evening, the chapel filled with people. It's not just nuns, but visitors, locals, students, travelers, even journalists. Of them came to listen. Lucille would play one or two pieces, often ending with a simple hymn. She didn't speak. Her music did. One day, a famous pianist visited her. He had won awards and performed in the biggest halls. He brought a team of producers and offered to record Lucille's music. She politely said, "No, I'm not here to be remembered," she told him. "I'm here to serve." But later that week, she changed her mind, not about recording, but about sharing her music with children. She asked if the local school would allow her to teach piano to young girls once a week. The school agreed with joy. So every Thursday afternoon, Lucille walked to the school, sat with small hands on the keys, and passed on the gift that had once nearly disappeared. One little girl asked her, "Sister Lucille, were you famous?" Lucille smiled. "I was lost," she replied softly. "But then I found my way home. It's better than fame." And so, she became not just a story, but a guide, a living proof that silence is not the end, and that age can never stop beauty from blooming again. The piano in the chapel was polished more often now, not out of pride, but out of love. It was no longer just an instrument. It was a part of Lucille's journey, a journey that had taken her from concert halls to a life of service, from the edge of being forgotten to the heart of many, sometimes late at night. When the convent was dark and quiet, Lucille would sit alone in the chapel. She'd play softly, not for anyone, but for herself, for God, for the memory of who she was and who she had become. And each note would rise into the air like a whispered prayer, reminding the world that even the quietest voices have something to say, and sometimes they say it the loudest of all. After returning from Paris, Sister Lucille's life changed in ways she had never imagined. The world outside the convent was buzzing with stories about the old nun who had stunned everyone with her piano playing. People talked about her courage, her talent, and her quiet strength. But inside the convent, life moved at its own gentle pace. And Lucille stayed true to her simple days, even though the media attention was intense at first. Lucille never let it change who she was. She never chased fame or fortune. Instead, she chose to keep giving back quietly. Her music was no longer just about concerts or applause. It was about healing, hope, and helping others find their own light in the darkness. Many visitors came to the convent. Some came with cameras and microphones, hoping for interviews or stories. Others came simply to hear her play or to be near her. But Lucille welcomed everyone with kindness and peace. She listened more than she spoke, and her smile made people feel safe. One day, a young woman arrived at the convent carrying a small child. She looked tired and worried. Lucille noticed her right away and walked over. "Can I help you, Lucille?" asked gently. The woman explained that her son had lost his ability to speak after an accident. The doctors had said it might never return. She had heard about Lucille's music and hoped it might help. Lucille sat with the boy and softly played a lullaby on the piano. The boy's eyes slowly closed as the music filled the room. After a while, the boy opened his eyes and smiled faintly. The mother wept quietly, thankful for the moment of peace. Stories like this began to spread. People said Lucille's music was magical, healing not only hearts, but sometimes bodies too. But Lucille never claimed any special powers. She only said, "Music is a gift from God. I just share it." Lucille also began to teach music to children from the village. Every week, a group of eager young students gathered in the chapel. Some were shy at first, unsure of their own talent. Others were bold and full of energy. But under Lucille's patient guidance, they all learned not just to play the piano, but to feel the music inside themselves. She believed music was more than notes and rhythms. It was a language of love and hope, a way to express feelings when words failed. "When you play, you speak with your heart," she told her students, "and everyone can hear." One of her students, a shy girl named Isabel, had never sung or spoken in public before. But when Lucille encouraged her to perform a small piece at the village festival, Isabel's confidence blossomed. That day her voice filled the air, clear and strong, and the crowd cheered. Lucille's eyes filled with tears. She knew she had helped more than just with music. She had helped a young soul find her own voice. As time passed, Lucille's story reached beyond the village, and the town invitations came from other countries, offering her chances to perform again. But each time she politely declined. She was happy where she was in the convent, surrounded by the sisters, the children, and the quiet life she loved. Still, the world wanted to know more about her past. Journalists dug into her history and found records of her early life as a musical prodigy. They learned how she had once dreamed of filling grand concert halls, but had chosen a different path. Many admired her sacrifice and humility. Others wondered how someone so talented could have been forgotten for so long. Lucille never spoke much about why she had left music for so many years. To her, it was a part of her journey that she had to take alone. She had faced pain, disappointment, and moments when she doubted herself. But through it all, her faith and her love for music never died. One afternoon, a reporter asked her, "Sister Lucille, what made you come back to the piano after all these years?" Lucille smiled softly and said, "Sometimes life asks us to wait. But when the time is right, the music returns. It's never really gone. It's inside us, waiting for the moment to be heard." That answer inspired many people. It reminded them that no matter how hard life may seem, hope can always find a way. Lucille's health began to slowly fade as the years went by. She grew weaker and moved more slowly. But her love for music never lessened. Even in her final days, she asked to be taken to the chapel to sit by the piano. On a quiet evening, surrounded by the sisters and some of her students, Lucille played one last piece. It was a gentle melody, full of peace and gratitude. As her fingers touched the keys, the room filled with warmth and light. Everyone listened with tears in their eyes, knowing this was a special moment. After the music ended, Lucille looked up and smiled. "Thank you," she whispered, "for listening." The next morning, Sister Lucille passed away peacefully in her sleep. The convent was filled with sadness, but also with deep gratitude. They knew she had lived a life full of love, faith, and music. Her funeral was attended by many people from local villagers to famous musicians and reporters. The chapel was packed with those who wanted to honor her memory. As the choir sang hymns and the organ played, everyone felt the presence of the woman who had brought so much beauty into the world. After the funeral, the convent decided to create a music scholarship in Lucille's name. It would help children from poor families learn music, just as she had taught in her final years. It was their way of keeping her spirit alive. The story of Sister Lucille spread far and wide. Books were written, documentaries made, and concerts held in her memory, but above all, she remained a symbol of hope and courage for people everywhere. Her life taught many lessons. That talent is a gift to be shared, no matter your age or circumstances. That silence does not mean the end, can be the start of something new, and that true beauty comes from within, shining brightest when we face the world with love and faith. Years later, children who had learned from her still played the piano with the same passion she had inspired. Villagers told stories about the old nun who once couldn't play, then stunned the world. And in quiet moments, when the chapel was still and the sun set softly, you could almost hear the notes of Sister Lucille's music drifting through the air, a reminder that some gifts never fade and some voices never truly fall silent.